Hello, I'm Mrs. McCall and I'm going to share with you a reading from one of my favourite novels at the moment, The Explorer by Katherine Rundell. This is an adventure novel that follows the story of 4 children who become stranded in the jungle after being involved in a plane crash. Chapter 1, Flight. Like a man-made magic wish, the aeroplane began to rise. The boy sitting in the cockpit gripped his seat and held his breath as the plane climbed into the arms of the sky. Fred's jaw was set with concentration and his fingers twitched, following the movements of the pilot beside him. Joystick, throttle. The aeroplane vibrated as it flew faster into the setting sun, following the swerve of the Amazon River below them. Fred could see the reflection of the 6-seater plane, a spot of black on the vast sweep of blue, as it sped towards Manaus, the city on the water. He brushed his hair out of his eyes and pressed his forehead against the window. Behind Fred sat a girl and her little brother. They had the same slanted eyebrows and same brown skin and the same long eyelashes. The girl had been shy, hugging her parents until the last possible moment at the airfield. Now she was staring down at the water, singing under her breath, her brother trying to eat his seatbelt. In the next row, on her own, sat a pale girl with blonde hair down to her waist. Her blouse had a neck ruffle that came up to her chin, and she kept tugging it down and grimacing. She was determinedly not looking out of the window. The airfield they had just left had been dusty and almost deserted, just a strip of tarmac under the ferocious Brazilian sun. Fred's cousin had insisted that he wear his school uniform and cricket jumper, and now, inside the hot, airless cabin, he felt like he was being gently cooked inside his own skin. The engine gave a whine, and the pilot frowned and tapped the joystick. He was old and soldierly, with brisk nostril hair and a grey waxed moustache, which seemed to reject the usual laws of gravity. He touched the throttle and the plane soared upwards, higher into the clouds. It was almost dark when Fred began to worry. The pilot began to belch, first quietly, then violently and repeatedly. His hand jerked and the plane dipped suddenly to the left. Someone screamed behind Fred. The plane lurched away from the river and over the canopy. The pilot grunted, gasped and wound back the throttle, slowing the engine. He gave a cough that sounded like a choke. Fred stared at the man. He was turning the same shade of grey as his moustache. Are you all right, sir?" he asked. "Is there something I can do?" Fighting for breath, the pilot shook his head. He reached over to the control panel and cut the engine. The roar ceased. The nose of the plane dipped downwards and the trees rose up. "What's happening?" asked the blonde girl sharply. "What's he doing? Make him stop!" The little boy in the back began to shriek. The pilot grasped Fred's wrist hard for a single moment, then his head slumped against the dashboard. And the sky, which had seconds before seemed so reliable, gave way. Chapter 2, The Green Dark. Fred wondered as he ran if he was dead. But, he thought, death would surely be quieter. The roar of the flames and his own blood vibrated through his hands and feet. The night was black. He tried to heave in breath to shout for help as he ran, but his throat was too dry and ashy to yell. He jabbed his finger into the back of his tongue to summon up spit. "Is anybody there? Help! Fire!" he shouted. The fire called back in response. A tree behind him sent up a fountain of flames. There was a rumble of thunder, but nothing else replied. A burning branch cracked, spat red, and fell in a cascade of sparks. Fred leapt away, stumbling backwards into the dark, smacking his head against something hard. The branch landed exactly where he'd been standing seconds before. He swallowed the bile that rose in his throat and began to run again, faster and wilder. Something landed on his chin and he ducked, smacking his face, but it was only a raindrop. The rain came suddenly and hard. It turned the soot and sweat on his hands into something like tar, but it began to quench the fire. Fred slowed his run to a jog, then a stop. Gasping, choking, he looked back at the way he had come. The little aeroplane was in the trees. It was smoking, sending up clouds of white and grey into the night sky. He stared around, dizzy and desperate, but he couldn't see or hear a single human, only the fern-like plants growing round his ankles, and the trees reaching hundreds of feet into the sky, and the panicked dive and shriek of birds. He shook his head hard, trying to banish the shipwreck roar in his ears. The hair on his arms was singed and smelt of eggs. He put his hand to his forehead. His eyebrow had charred, and part of it came away on his fingers. He wiped his eyebrow on the sleeve of his shirt. Fred looked down at himself. One leg of his trousers was ripped all the way up to the pocket, but none of his bones felt broken. There was vicious pain, though, in his back and neck, and it made his arms and legs feel far off and foreign. A voice came suddenly from the dark. "Who's there? Get away from us." And if you want to find out what happens to the children in this story, then I suggest you read this book.